Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to episode 6 of Chess Basics, things every chess player should know. We have some fun things to show you today. We're picking up from last week where we looked at, last episode, where we looked at the Ruy Lopez, the Morphy defense, and we're going to go into what's called the open variation of the Ruy Lopez today. And there's some interesting complications along the way. So first of all, let's show how this opening starts. It's e4, e5. You can see these are very popular moves. This is one of the most played openings in the book. And the Morphy defense, a6, is the most common defense. This setup here with bishop b5, the knights and the pawns, is the Ruy Lopez. a6 is the Morphy defense. And the most common move is bishop a4. Last time we looked at the idea of taking the knight and trying to win a pawn, and we saw that didn't work. So this time, just following the main line. After the bishop retreats, black logically develops another piece and attacks pawn in the center. And white simply ignores this threat on the pawn and just castles. And that's the question we left you with last time, is how can white possibly get away with this? And it turns out it's perfectly safe for white, and but it's also, black can take that pawn and play on. So it's a playable line for black, and you'll see it's not the most popular. The bishop e7, the closed Ruy Lopez, is the most popular, and we'll look at that next week. But this week we're going to look at knight takes e4, the open Ruy. Now you might think that white would want to try and win the pawn back right away with rook e1, but the most common move here is d4, and let's take a look at this guy. After playing d4, black can take the pawn here. That's one of the possibilities, not particularly popular. But let's follow the main line and show that first. b5, bishop b3. So the bishop has to retreat. b5 blocked that attack on the knight, so there's no longer a threat to trade it off and just win a pawn here outright. Of course, white currently has two attackers against this pawn on e5, so he can pretty much pick that up at any time, but it's black's move here. And again, one of his choices to try and take that pawn, but his most common move is d5. So he passes up two opportunities to take that pawn, and finally white decides that he's had enough, and he takes the pawn himself. So he leaves that pawn on d4 dangling like a lure for two moves, and then he finally takes back, and now the pawns are even, the material is even, and the game continues from here. Let's show a couple moves. Bishop e6 is a normal black response, defending this pawn, which was under attack from the bishop and the queen, and stopping this pawn from advancing. Now, white usually continues with c3 first, and then knight b d2. Here, let's just show those moves, like here and here. And this moving the pawn allows a retreat square for this bishop. This knight, one idea for black is to have this knight go to the c4 square, c5 square, where it'd be attacking the bishop. And the other idea for black is just to leave the knight there and instead bring the bishop to c4 and try and c5 and try and gang up on this pawn here. So white wants to discourage that a little bit. He wants to get rid of the knight that's in the center and might be a thorn in his side. So that's why white is playing the moves c3 and knight bd2 to try to challenge that. So the game continues from here, and that is the main line of the open Ruy Lopez. I'm not going to go any further down the main line. What I wanted to do this time is go back and look at those moves we passed by, the moves that weren't played. You have to wonder why these moves weren't played. And also, what do you do if you're white and you're trying to play the Ruy Lopez and black pulls one of these crazy moves on you? What are you going to do about it? So let's look at the first time where it occurs. So black has taken a pawn. You've played d4. This is the very earliest chance that black has to take that pawn. Let's say he takes it. This is called the Riga variation. I'm not sure if it starts right here or if it starts a few moves later, but this variation has an interesting history. But let's just talk about the position on the board. Black has two extra pawns now, but he's opened up his king and his knight to this pin. So the rook attacks the knight, and the knight can't move because it's pinned against the king. So black has to support the knight, and then white can take this pawn here. And it looks like white is just winning. And the reason why white is winning here, or why it looks like he's winning, is that the knight is now threatening to take, and this knight is pinned, and this knight is pinned. So really, black's moves are pretty limited here. And if he allows the knight to take, the pawn will take back, and then when the bishop takes, it's check, forking the king and the rook. So not only does it win a pawn, but it wins a whole piece. So this looks pretty devastating for white, and it's the reason why this is rarely played for black. But it turns out there is one really clever move it's shown here in the opening book. And let's hide that, and let's just go back to the notation. And the really clever move for black here is bishop d6. And now, for sure, this is the Riga variation. This goes back to a game that was played between the town of Riga in Latvia and the town of Berlin in Germany. It was in the 19th century. And this opening was played off and on since then. The most famous game is Capablanca versus Lasker, which was played in 1915. And this was Edward Lasker, not Emanuel Lasker, the world champion, but Edward Lasker, who was another chess player around the same time. So 1915, almost 100 years ago, they worked all this out without computers. pretty smart guys. So how does this work? What's the trick with bishop d6? Well, white has got this terrible threat, and he goes ahead and executes that threat. He takes the knight, which is threatening the queen. And now what black has is the amazing move, bishop takes h2 check. So he's given up one piece over here. He's leaving his queen hanging, but he plays a check. And if white takes that, then black has the follow-up queen h4 check. There's only one move that is legal for white. That's king back. And then the queen can take this square because the knight is on that square. So the queen can take on f2 check. And the king has two choices. He can go to here or to here. It doesn't matter which one he goes to. Say he goes to here. He was on the other square last time. Queen here check, back, queen here check. It's a draw. It's a draw by threefold repetition. So unless white wants a draw, he's not going to play that. So what can white do instead? Let's back up. After bishop takes h2 check, just king h1, avoiding the check, new main line. So black comes out here with the queen anyway, and this is how the game Capablanca Lasker went. And Capablanca was white, and it's white's move, and he came up with this great move here. I don't know if this goes back to the Riga game or if this was an invention of Capablanca's, but what he can play is rook takes knight check. And this looks a little bit crazy, giving up a piece, but remember he's already won a piece, and if he gets rid of the queen, he can get another piece there. So it's not so bad. And black is in check. He needs to do something about this, and his queen is threatened. If he takes the rook with the queen, then white will just grab the bishop over here, and he'll be ahead material. So black takes with the pawn, keeping the pressure on the white king. And now the follow-up move for white is this crazy move here. Queen to d8 check. And there's only one legal move for black. First of all, the king can't take the queen because it's protected by the knight. And it can't run away because the queen is attacking all these squares it might run to. The only legal move is to take the queen. And then white, of course, takes back to get his material back. And then black can either retreat the bishop or take the knight. Oh, no, I'm sorry. He can't retreat the bishop because he's in check. Yep, let's back up and show that. When the knight took the queen, it unveiled a check on the king. So really his only move to maintain material balance is to take. And then white takes there. So let's pause and assess. This is the Riga variation again. And black has two rooks and a bishop. White has one rook, but he has two bishops and a knight. So effectively he has an extra bishop and knight, say these two, for that rook. So that's a slight advantage in pieces, but black has an advantage in pawns. Black has two extra pawns on this side of the board. And turns out this is a playable game again. So Capablanca went on to win. This might be slightly easier to play for white. His strategy is to use his extra pieces to mop up the pawns. But if black can get his rooks active, black can also hold this game or maybe win. So both sides can play this. And that's what happens on these sidelines. It's funny how many games have been played between masters or even regular players where they just go through the moves and they ignore all the sidelines. So e takes d4, so that's here. d4, they just play b5 all the time, and they totally miss this complete variation starting with e takes d4. So as white, you shouldn't really be afraid of it. The main thing to remember is just play the natural moves, pinning, attacking, taking the pawn and attacking here. And the only move that saves the game for black is this bishop d6 idea. And then if he goes, if he does do this, you have to go in with takes knight. Otherwise, you're just going to be you haven't gotten anything out of the opening. So you're kind of forced to go down this line. And you have to remember not to take the bishop, but to play king h1 and to take the knight when you get the chance with check. So crazy line. And that was just the first time. Remember the way the main line went, it was knight takes e4. Let's back up and show that. Knight takes e4, d4, then black plays d5, white goes bishop b3, and then the normal move is d5 supporting the knight, and now white gets his pawn back. But here's another chance to take that pawn, and what happens if black takes it here? This time it's better for white. So actually both times it's better for white, which is why you don't usually see this, but it's still a bit tricky to figure out how to deal with each of these. So this is a new variation. Again, he's opened himself up for this pin, so you should take advantage of that. Attacking his knight. He will defend the knight. And now the right idea here is this crazy move, knight to c3. And what's the idea with this? Well, first of all, black can take the knight, but if he does, you play bishop takes. And then this bishop is actually forking these two knights. Oops, back up. Did not mean to do that. The bishop is forking these two knights, and furthermore, this knight is pinned against the rook, so he can't really move away like that. I would just grab the rook. And the threat is to take this knight with check and then win the rook. So black defends with bishop to b7, and white grabs the knight. And this sets up another discovered attack on the king. So in order to cover that, black plays the move bishop e7. And now white's recovered his material, or he will recover it whenever he takes this pawn. And he's got a good position. His pieces are developed. Black's king is still in the center. And he just needs to develop this bishop or take this pawn. So that's how this variation goes. So actually black, the best move for black is not even to take the knight, but to leave it there. And let's turn on the engine to make sure I get this part right. Yeah, the best move for black is bishop to e6, defending this pawn. And so that the idea of allowing the take and grabbing here doesn't work anymore. So now this knight needs to move. Play knight takes e4, pawn takes, rook takes, and now white is getting his pawn back. He's threatening to take here and win the pawn that way, also with check. Black again plays bishop e7 to alleviate some of the pressure, but bishop takes, pawn takes, rook takes, and there you have it. White has got his material back and he's got a good position again. So that's what I wanted to show you. It's the Ruy Lopez open variation. We showed you the main line and two side variations. What happens when black tries to grab up those dangling pawns? So let's go through, just for the sake of memory here, let's turn the engine off. And let's go through this opening again, and we'll call it a wrap. So e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, Ruy Lopez, a6, Morphy defense. Bishop a4 was the main line. Knight f6, attacking the pawn in the center. Castle, leaving the pawn dangling. Grabbing the pawn, this is the open variation. And d4, daring black to take the d-pawn, and white gets this pin on the knight. But the main line is not to take, but to play b5, pushing that bishop around. Bishop goes back to b3, really the only move. And then play d5, supporting this knight. And again, not daring to take this pawn and get a horrible pin on the knight against the king there. Now, finally, white has had enough. He takes the pawn, and black plays bishop e6. So we're up to move 8, and that's all I'm going to show of the open variation of the Ruy Lopez. Hope you guys enjoyed that, and next episode, I'm gonna go back and look at the bishop e7, the closed Ruy Lopez. See you then. Bye.